I just got back from Germany, and while I was there, I went to the miniature wonderland in Hamburg. I took a lot of photos, like a lot. And looking back at them, I noticed that a lot of the photos have an interesting effect. Then a few Thursdays ago, I'm getting my free weekly Unity asset, and it's a tilt shift effect, which piqued my curiosity. By the way, I put a link in the description to the publisher sale page, which has a new free Unity asset every Thursday. So what is a tilt shift effect actually, and how can you accurately make one? Let's figure all that out. I want to start out by saying that what I thought was a tilt shift effect in all of my photos is absolutely not one. These are just photos of miniatures. Tilt shift is a specific effect used to make something big look miniature. In the real world, a tilt shift effect is achieved by taking a camera, hopefully one a little more modern than this, and physically tilting the lens, then shifting the position of that lens to offset it from the center of the sensor, hence the name tilt shift. You can buy a specialized tilt shift lens online, but it will run you back a pretty penny. These are in fact camera lenses. Cost aside, a tilt shift can be used to photograph tall buildings without making them look like they're angled away from you. It can also help you make things look miniature because it skews the depth of field, which changes what's in focus, blurring out the rest, which is exactly what it looks like when you take a picture of actual miniatures. It's also worth noting that this isn't just simply blurring things. This is changing the plane of focus, both the angle of the plane and its offset. If we take this image of some houses in Switzerland, the leftmost house in the row is in focus, and so is every other house in the row. This isn't what it looks like with a normal focal plane, this is what it looks like when the focal plane is tilted. Usually the focal plane is parallel to the camera's sensor, or film if you're still using one of these. It's a lot easier to focus the camera when we only have to keep track of the distance between our camera and our subject. When you look at a photo taken with a parallel focal plane, the blurring should not be diagonal. With this, we know that the photos that I took are in fact not tilt shifted, they're just pictures of miniatures. Okay, let's check out this Unity asset. I just wanted to shout out this page again. If you use Unity and you have a Unity account, then you can get a free asset every week at this page as a store.unity.com/publisher sale. Right now, the Gooners are eating. We have this streetwear girl 2 and casual wear girls pack 3 asset. It doesn't take very long to find a Gooner image. A Gooner image. Sometimes the quality is shoddy, but sometimes you get Gooner material. I hate that. There's too many references in this video to incel shit. There's Gooner material. We're drawing green lines on photos. It's bad. Let's actually look at the asset now. I want to do a real quick investigation of this Unity asset because it looks promising. I don't know if it actually is. After you've added tilt shift as a renderer feature, you get the ability to actually control it from your renderer asset, your render data asset. We can see with the intensity slider that we go from no blurring at all to a blur effect around the top and the bottom of the screen. And interestingly, when you have it like here, you get this, as the effect would be in a video editor, it's a directional blur. There's a quality check I would never use because this looks kind of bad actually. If we full screen this, and if I move, you can see that this is really bad. So what other options do we have? We can edit the aperture, which if we go into debug mode, you can actually see the aperture opening and closing, and then we can edit the angle of the blur effect. I would say that this helps the overall feel of it being a tilt shift, but it still just looks like a blur. We also have this offset. The angle would be the tilt and the offset would be the shift of a tilt shift effect, and it does a pretty okay job at this. I would say if we set it to the floor region, I'm gonna close the aperture a bit. Maybe if we edit the angle a little bit, it is like by definition replicating a tilt shift effect, but it doesn't get the miniature effect. I feel like often people get those two confused. Right here it says used to simulate a miniature scene, and I'm kind of iffy on that. This is the asset store page, and they link a demo which is different from the demo that's in the package. It has a little scene and it turns on tilt shift. I would argue this still doesn't look miniature. The issue that I have with this asset is that it is effectively just a vignette, and instead of dimming the image or changing the color of the image, we blur it. This kind of looks miniature, but it doesn't get all the way there. It doesn't necessarily capture the scale of the image, because all tilt shifting would would do would be to move the focal plane. And this unfortunately doesn't actually move the focal plane. We just have everything in focus, and then we decide what we want in focus and out of focus, which is how you would mimic this effect in like Photoshop. So I think that there are a few things that could make this effect more convincing, because this does look like a tilt shift, but I don't think it achieves the goal of looking miniature. So this is, I think, about as close to the miniature effect as I can get out of this asset, or at least this demo, to get it to look like this. Now, obviously, like, this photo is pretty high resolution and it's taken with an actual camera. So we're dealing with physical light, not rendering, but there are a few things that I think could transfer into a rendered image that make it look more miniature. The angle of the camera kind of matters. We can't get the camera as small as the miniatures are. Because of that, we are sort of limited in where we can position the camera. And that is why like tilt shift effects were created, is to change the focal plane or change the perspective to correct for the position of the camera. The next thing would be that we are effectively just altering the screen texture, because if we turn the intensity down, everything is rendered in focus properly. And that is not how light works going into a camera. The way that you can tell that this is taken with a real camera is that this section right here is further from the camera than this is, and it's out of focus. And the focal plane cuts the entire frame. So when we're using the tilt shift asset, everything that's right here would be in focus, but we clearly have these pathways between parts of the Colosseum that are out of focus because they are physically further away from the camera. And that is something that you cannot replicate with a screen space effect. You would need to do some sort of combination of the depth texture and the screen texture. We'd have to fundamentally change how the image is rendered. And then we have the level of details. Like this, I would argue that this lamppost is too high detail-wise. It's too high fidelity to be a miniature, and because of that, it kind of hinders the effect. We can send you back to me, but hopefully showered. I don't have normal glasses, so you're gonna have to bear with me looking like a douchebag for a little bit.
Actually, games like Link's Awakening don't use a tilt shift effect. They just blur the top and the bottom of the screen to mimic a macro lens.
That's enough of that. That was kind of rough. They do this because they want the miniature effect, but they don't actually need to tilt shift the camera to achieve it. Tilt shift is used to correct or change the perspective of an image taken with a physical camera, like the one that is currently recording me. For a video game, you wouldn't need to correct the perspective of the image because you can control how it's rendered in the first place. We're not using a physical camera. With 3D renders, we don't need to make large objects look miniature. We can just assume that they are miniature and fake the rest of the effect. So, are there any games that use a real tilt shift effect? The Link's Awakening remake and Echoes of Wisdom? They fake it by blurring the top and the bottom of the screen. We kind of already went over that. Tunic also fakes it. Zack Zero, it's just a depth of field effect. The Plucky Squire, this is also just a depth of field effect. Apparently City Skylines 2, which is a game that I do not own, lets you control the camera as if it was a quote-unquote physical camera. You can put the game into photo mode and then control the scene as well as the camera settings. This Reddit user posted their settings, which enabled them to get video footage of their city, which looks miniature. I don't want to be that guy again, but let's draw some lines over the footage. All of these clips have parallel focal planes. Even in the Reddit post, they set the vertical shift setting, which they correctly say is the shift part of a tilt shift effect, but they don't tilt the lens. They just offset it. So again, to my dismay, this is not a real tilt shift effect, despite claiming that it is. Games are all about tricks. Today I'm only going to be talking about visual tricks, but pretty much everything in game development is achieved with some level of trickery, despite how much the word realism gets thrown around. We render weapons on a layer above the rest of the world so they don't clip into walls in a first-person shooter. We usually only animate what can be seen. Hell, we only render what can be seen, which is why you often notice objects popping in and out of reflections if those reflections only contain what's already drawn on the screen. In Raft, even though it looks like you're moving throughout the world, it's actually the world that is moving and not you. So it looks like you're moving, but you're actually staying in the same place. Even rasterization and ray tracing are just spoofing what we see in real life. Neither process accurately represents the way that we view the world. We've gotten good at faking it. We've gotten really good at faking it, but we're still just faking it. So why don't any games use a real tilt shift? Mostly because it's not necessary. Like I said earlier, a tilt shift effect is used to correct or change the perspective of an image taken by a physical camera. camera. It's not a physical camera in a game world. We can control the rendering entirely. We can control the scale of the scene, so we don't have to worry about controlling the perspective for large objects. We aren't limited by where humans can take the camera. An in-game camera doesn't take up real space. It doesn't have to be held, it can go through walls, and it can attach or detach from a subject at will. And then on top of that, why would a game use a real tilt shift effect? Depth of field is something that players instinctively turn off, so why would they want something that further limits their visibility? I mean, it would be cool and artsy to have a scene where, say, you're walking through a market. Think the hairpin section from Delfino Square. We could set up the scene such that the focal plane was along the pathway that the player could walk, making the tops of market stalls and the water below out of focus. And while that would be really cool, it could impact gameplay. And the level of impact entirely depends on the kind of game that you're making. For games about perspective or exploration, this could be a huge benefit to the overall vibe of the game, but for games like Link's Awakening, where you could be in combat at any time, blurring enemies would lower your ability to strategize about enemy type and position while playing. So you'd have to limit these blur effects anyways. I watched a ton of toy train movies as a toddler, which may contribute to why I love trains now. And they were either shot at a low frame rate or animated using a process like stop motion. So when I took videos of the minis in Hamburg, I took them all in 30 FPS. I did this to make the footage look like those toy train movies, and I honestly believe that it subconsciously helps that miniature effect. But limiting frame rate could impact gameplay tremendously. Lastly, and this is probably the biggest one, is that you need to commit to the bit. You need to fully commit to the bit. The Unity asset demo doesn't look miniature because the scene is not designed to look miniature. It's a normal scene that leaves the tilt shift effect to do all of the heavy lifting, and it doesn't completely work. Link's Awakening's whole art style looks miniature. The scale of the game is small. None of the models have too much detail. The models are even styled cartoonishly. The textures are simple, the colors are bright, and objects like trees, which are matte in real life, reflect light rather than diffusing it. You need to commit to the bit. You need to fully commit because the art style in its entirety is going to contribute to the miniature effect. You can't just blur the screen texture and call it a day. In conclusion, nobody knows what tilt shift is, seemingly, but everyone likes saying those words because they sound cool. Maybe one day I will make a game that uses a proper tilt shift like the market idea I described earlier, or I might make a game about photography. I took a bunch of photos in Germany and it was a very pleasant experience. I wish I could have a little more often. Maybe we could let the player actually tilt shift the lens in game. It'd be a pretty cool thing to simulate, I think. Also, I made a Patreon. I have a few posts up there about some assets that I made. There's also a tentative video schedule, which hopefully it can all get done. I want to work on all the videos, but I am ultimately human. I'm still working on the perks for the Patreon page, but I wanted to get it up there so I could start integrating it into my workflow. Nothing is going to change on the YouTube side, but there will definitely be benefits to joining the Patreon. Anyways, if you want more game art content, then check out this video I made on post-processing. And with that, I'll see you soon. Peace.